I'm never convinced that people do things purely for the money in itself. It's more the money is a score. So it's like a game where the score is the size of your bonus or the size of your salary.
Hello and welcome to the Aspects of History podcast. My name's Oliver Webb-Carter and I'm the editor. And today I'm continuing my chat with Michael Ridpath, who was the author of our fiction book of the month, which we discussed last week. That was Traitor's Gate, which is based around the Munich 1938 trip made by Neville Chamberlain, which is the subject of a Netflix movie. And so this week we're continuing our discussion on some of Michael's other work, which features the 1930s, spying, some Icelandic murder noir mysteries that he writes, and also financial crime thrillers. So that's really what you heard at the top there, with Michael going into what motivates some of the crime that takes place in the financial world. Elsewhere at Aspects of History, we have our non-fiction book of the month, which is Leander de Lisle's book, The White King. And this really is to coincide with the trial and execution of Charles I, which was in January 1649. And she's also written a fantastic piece on that trial. It's all on the homepage. And you can read an interview with her where she talks about her book, The White King, which won the Historical Writing Association's award in 2018. Fantastic book. So head over to our website for that. Also on our website, and I mentioned this last week, and I do recommend you have a look as well on our homepage, we have the Aspects of History Unpublished Historical Novel Award. This is a fantastic opportunity for any of you writers out there who've got an unpublished novel, or even self-published. We're accepting self-published. It's got to be historical fiction. The prize is £500 plus the novel will be published. And so you have between the February the 1st, which has already happened, up until June the 1st this year to enter. There'll be 6 nominees announced in September, and then in November, on the 1st of November, we announce the winner. So head over, upload your manuscript. It's £10 an entry, but it's nothing when you consider that the potential rewards available. Once again, a £500 prize, and the book would be published with one of the UK's leading independent publishers. So that's what's happening back at Aspects of History. So I will move you over to me talking to Michael, where we cover the 1930s. If you want to get hold of me, I'm on the Twitter at OllieWCQ. That's OLLIEWCQ. Always happy to hear from you. And I hope you enjoy the show. So we've mentioned the 30s, obviously, and this is a bit of a segue into your other novel, which is The Diplomat's Wife, which captures another area of history, which is so interesting. Are all those communist spies running around in the 30s? Now, we all know about the Cambridge spies, probably. But I was interested, this novel is interesting because I know you've written about young people at that time who saw the only alternative to fascism as communism, which drove a lot of them into the arms of I guess, what would it have been, the sort of foreign version of the NKVD in those days?
Yeah, well, it was the Comintern,
Yes.
which was an international organization of communists. And the point was it was supposed to be nothing to do with any one country, but it would lead to an international communist world order. Since there was only one country that had communism, obviously the Comintern was based in Moscow, and Moscow was very helpful to it. And that was what a lot of communists for a little while in the 1930s believed. And it is interesting how, I mean, we saw it, well, we didn't see it with the financial crash, but obviously 29-30 was a major economic dislocation where things were getting seriously wrong. And young people, young intellectuals and others thought this just isn't working. Capitalism is broken. Communism is the way to fix it. And I can, obviously I don't agree, but I can understand why people would think that and wouldn't necessarily think that thinking that was betraying their country at all. And then, of course, what's interesting is how that becomes betraying your country. And it did that via this the Comintern. So the Soviet handlers were all supposed to be working for the Comintern, and so all the Cambridge spies and the others thought they were working for the Comintern rather than Russia. And then it kind of became clear that they were working for Russia, but by that time it was too late.
Well, there was one event that I was interested in, which was debated in the Oxford Union, I think, in '33, which is quite interesting. The proposal was, or the motion was, that you should not fight for your king and country.
Yes.
Now, I don't think they specified who they would be fighting in that debate, did they? But I was reading up on it, and it was difficult for them to find people to propose and support the motion at the debate, but it was passed fairly comfortably. Yes, I was reading that the philosopher C.E.M. Joad was brought in after a number of people, including Bertrand Russell, who pulled out, to talk for the motion that you shouldn't fight for your country. And Joad, a philosopher, I think later tried to become a Labour MP, and then it's quite funny. He ends up his downfall is that he fails to pay for his train ticket on the way to Devon. Shades of Jeremy Corbyn here, but he took a policy when he got on the train, was he didn't agree with paying for his tickets. But anyway, that was his downfall. So we've gone off on a slight tangent there. But this Oxford Union debate made quite a few waves in those days. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you was John King and Ernest Oldham, who did actually spy for the Russians successfully during the 30s, whereas the Cambridge spies were active later. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a very good book by Richard Davenport Hines about the Russian spies. And they started off, I think the first recruits were in 1919 with the police. So the police went on strike, and there were lots of strikes all over Britain in 1919. They were very sort of socialist inspired and communist inspired. So they had a few recruits from the police, and they recruited various other sort of working people, lower middle class people. And then there were quite a few of them, and then they managed to get people who were, I think they were King's messengers, those King and Oldham. I think they were King's messengers. So basically, they were people who were taking messages to and from the embassies back to London. And then it was only later that they began to start recruiting people who were from Oxford and Cambridge and were more likely to become part of the establishment and therefore useful later on. So, but there were lots and lots of lower level spies who did pass over some secrets to the Russians in the 20s and the 30s who were much less famous.
And of course, the Cambridge spies, I guess they were moles, weren't they, really, for many years after they were recruited. Now, the Diplomat's Wife, which is that your most recent novel? I think it is, isn't it? You've got another Iceland one coming out soon, and we'll talk a bit about that. But I wondered about, because when you're writing a spy novel set in the past, even if it's in the 30s, the Le Carré looms large. I mean, are you a fan of Le Carré? I assume you are. And how was his presence whilst writing the novel? And because I'd imagine anyone, I've just been reading Jackson Lamb novels by Mick Herron. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And even reading those set. Yeah.
It was great.
So I wondered what your thoughts were while you were writing.
Well, those are almost. My thought was exactly that. I mean, Le Carré is he creates his own world, and I don't know whether it's a spy world. It seems very much his own. I've never really met many people in real life who talk like people in the Carey novels.
Yeah, it's amazing.
They're really interesting people, and they're great characters. But I've often kind of wondered if they really are real. And I met a few spies, and I know that MI6 has been affected by the novels, so they've started using terms that Le Carre made up. So obviously, to some extent, it's accurate, but things were very different in the 30s. The British intelligence office was the SIS was very famous because of spy novels before. I mean, there's the Quex novels and various other people writing from about 1900 to 1920 and 30. Hitler loved reading spy novels about British spies. So everyone thought that the SIS were the experts at spying. So in some ways, that's sort of strange. But of course, the thing is, when you're writing about the 1930s spies, communist spies in the 30s, you're talking about young men and women just out of, in their 20s. And it's easier to try and think, well, what was I like in my 1920s? I had friends who were very ideological, and try and put yourself in their position. And I think you come up with a slightly different kind of character than the normal one you meet in a Le Carre novel. So, for example, in The Diplomat's wife's brother, Hugh, is one of these people who is believes capitalism is broken, communism is the only answer, and he enthuses his sister that this is the case. And then when Hugh is killed, she kind of takes up the mantle. And in doing that, that's not a really, it's not a very Le Carre-like situation to be in. Although when I researched the way that the Soviet handlers handled people like the Diplomat's Wife in my book, there is a lot of spycraft, which is just like a Le Carre novel. And a lot of that, I think, was developed in the 20s and 30s. So, dead letter boxes and all that kind of thing definitely went on, and people meeting each other on park benches in Regent's Park and Paris and so on. That happened.
And Moscow Rules. Now, I didn't know if that was a thing or if is that Le Carre language that's because I only mention that because it has filtered through into other novels now. Moscow Rules is almost official.
Yeah, I don't think I came across that at the time, but I wouldn't swear to it. So I think I'd pass on that one.
Yeah. You also have written a series of successful novels set. Now, this is where we go Scandi noir, don't we? It's Iceland detective novels. So why did you do that? I mean, it's your first series of novels are financial thrillers, and they were really successful. Why Iceland, or did it pick you?
Well, it probably did. I wanted to written a series of financial thrillers, which is something I knew about, and they say you should write about what you know. But then when I was sort of thinking about my 9th or 10th book, I thought, well, I'd like to write about something I don't know, so then I can find out about it in much the same way I found out about Britain and Germany in the 1930s. So I'd been on a book tour to Iceland when my first novel, Free to Trade, came out in 1995. And it was just a weird place that really enchanted me. And I thought then, well, one day I can write a book in Iceland, God knows how. And so Iceland kind of popped into my head. And I did all sorts of analysis, which was a waste of time, pros and cons of writing books all over the world. But I came back to the place that had popped in my head at the beginning. And the good thing about Iceland is it's an island. You can find out a lot about it. It's a very interesting place, but it's not as big and complicated as, say, Russia or Germany. You can find out an awful lot about it fairly efficiently. And the other thing, of course, is the history. So whilst these are detective novels set in the 21st century, 2 or 3 of them involve sagas, because I'd always enjoyed early medieval history, and of course the Icelandic sagas are set in the 11th century or 10th and 11th centuries. And I've kind of worked out ways of injecting those into a modern murder mystery a couple of times. In fact, my first book, Where the Shadows Lie, involves a lost saga that inspired Tolkien to write Lord of the Rings, because he was stuck after The Hobbit. Apparently he really was. So between chapter 1 and chapter 2 of The Hobbit, he discovered this lost, in my book, he discovered this lost saga, which meant I had to write the lost saga, which was fun. So that was, and then obviously, if there's a lost saga that Tolkien used, all kinds of people want to get it, and someone gets murdered and so on. So it was, I managed to get quite a lot of historical research into that. There's another one called The Wanderer, which is about an archaeologist who's sort of put fake clues about where the Norsemen, how far into America they got when they were exploring North America. And they do it for fun, and then one of them dies, and the clues are still out there, and they're discovered, and people get killed again. So yeah, I managed to combine the history and the modern day detective novel quite amusingly for myself, anyway.
And now I was reading that you were saying in some of your descriptions on your website, it's fantastic. I do recommend, I'll put a link into your website where you go through all of your novels in quite a lot of detail. It's really interesting. But you've described the Icelandic people as odd, and yes. I was tell me a bit about that. Why are they odd?
Well, they're odd because for all sorts of reasons. I mean, in some ways,
and they say they're odd themselves, don't they? I mean, yeah, we're not slagging them off. And
no. I do that to their faces. They are very energetic. So although people think of long, dark Scandinavian nights, the summers, it's daylight all the time. So you go to Iceland in June, and they're all running around doing 20 different jobs. They all have several jobs. They work incredibly hard. They take very quick decisions. They're very modern. They love modern fashions and fads, on the one hand. On the other hand, there is this sort of deep culture of superstition. Grandparents will think that they've spoken to elves, for example. Almost everyone's grandmother has spoken to an elf or great-grandmother. So the elves and the hidden people are always just beneath the surface of Iceland. They're, the country itself doesn't have any trees, and there's all these kind of frozen lava everywhere. So it's a kind of strange place with rather energetic, strange people. So it's an extraordinary place to write about it. So the descriptions are, it's easy to make the place sound interesting because it just is. And
you've written you've also ventured into your first non-fiction book, Writing in Ice, which we reviewed. It's positively reviewed. I recommend people check that book out. But talk a little bit about Writing in Ice.
Yes, well, I've written. Well, at that stage, I'd written 5 Icelandic novels. So I had several hundred pages of notes, 500 pages of notes on the village in Snæfellsnes, on history, culture, food, drink, Christmas, all sorts of things that were just there, which I find very useful. It's all sort of organized by subject. So if I'm writing something, I've just got a few paragraphs on whatever it is I need. And I thought, well, it's a shame. I should put this out there. You know, it should be available for everyone. And then I thought, well, that's a bit boring. And then being a novelist, I thought, well, it needs a story behind it. So the story could be how I found out about Iceland. And then I kind of, if it's a story, it has to have some stakes in it. So when I was doing this, I was reinventing myself to try and sell my books again. So I didn't know that the Iceland books would be published. So it's a question of, would I be able to research this country? How would I find out about it? So I put in the interviews I did with various people and my sort of various experiences in researching Iceland. And I made it humorous because there is an awful lot of rather odd, quirky things that happen in Iceland. It was quite easy to put them in the book. So it's a bit like I hesitate to compare myself to Bill Bryson, but I try to put a Bill Bryson tone to it. So it's kind of how a crime writer found out about Iceland. And I hope if people go there, they'll learn a lot about the country.
So do you have, do you watch any of the TV shows that are set around, in Iceland?
Yes,
and
yeah,
all
yes,
yeah. Do you have a favorite?
I liked, Trapped is good, which is the one with the big hairy guy, Oliver Dari, and it's based in a ferry comes in from Denmark to a small town, and then there's a a dead body found and the town is snowed in. So that's quite good. There's one called Press, which I think I found on DVD, and I don't know if it's actually been, it's a sort of series about journalists, which is quite good. And then there was that, the one, I think the film I enjoyed the most was the one about the crazy woman, mountain woman, trying to stop, I think she's trying to stop a power station or something. That was really good. I've forgotten what that's called.
I don't know. I'll have to find that one. Yeah. Do you ever? Because there's such a massive element of I guess TV culture, but it's filtered through everywhere. Are they of any influence at all when you're writing your novels?
No. I mean, all novelists find a producer will come along and option your book. You get really excited, and then nothing happens. Then another producer comes along, more option, and the problem is they ask you to consult and write free, basically give them free work so they can try and put something together. And whilst that's great, most of them don't come off, and I've had about 3 or 4 or 5 of those that haven't come off. So I've taken the view that if something does come from television or film, that's great. But I won't set any store in it until it happens. So I don't write specifically with a TV series in mind at all. So definitely write for readers of books.
And so you've got a very interesting background, and we'll talk a bit about what your novels that made your name. But you started out working for was it Saudi International Bank, which was a subsidiary of, I think we might have shared a sort of vast overall controller, giant American investment bank. I also worked for in the past. So the similarity we both have is we both got out.
Right.
But you got out a lot earlier. Well, you worked for in financial services, in banking as a bond trader. You got out a lot earlier. I mean, I was in a bank for far too long, nearly 18 years. You got out a lot earlier, so you must have done your crimes in the past were not so serious as mine. But why did you leave?
Well, I wrote a book which became Free to Trade, which was a novel about a bond trader, just for fun. And it was really great fun. I became obsessed by it. So I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do a couple of hours before going into work. I gave up watching television. It was a real labor of love. And when I finished it, I rewrote it and rewrote it. It took me 3 years, and then finally I had a book, and I sent it out to be published. But I assumed it wouldn't be published because I was realistic. And then it was. I got an agent, and she put it out to auction with people all over the world. So there was a British who went for it, and American publishers and German publishers. And I was getting hundreds of thousands of pounds in advance, which was completely mad. But meant I could give up work, give up working for a bank and start writing full time, which is what I did, which was great. Although writing a second book in those circumstances is quite difficult because you don't know whether they've all made some dreadful mistake. So it was a little tense in some ways, but I was just basically extremely lucky. My book came out at the time when publishers were looking for a British John Grisham writing white collar thrillers, and then I sent in my white collar thriller by good fortune just at the time they were all kind of scrabbling around. And so, that was I've had good luck and bad luck in my career. The good luck was right at the beginning.
Now, working in that banking industry, I get you had a lot of, it's fertile territory, I think, for if you're writing crime thrillers.
Yes, I mean, what I found interesting was the sort of morality of it. And I think morality is important for any thriller. And I don't know if you found this, but there are the good guys and the bad guys, but a lot of it is shades of grey. And in particular, the people who started out, nice guys who get tempted to break a rule, bend a rule here or there, or lie to someone. And then it gets a little worse and a little worse and a little worse. And sometimes they find themselves completely, enmeshed in some fraud or some terrible situation. And so the plot that I would normally have is in order to get themselves out of there, they have to kill somebody, which Fortunately, doesn't happen very much in real life, but you can see how it could. So a lot of my characters are people who are tempted to stray from the not just the bad guys, but the good guys as well. Who are tempted by the big bonuses, the next deal, selling the next bond issue, whatever. So it's a sort of temptation and ambition, and the greed. Although I've always, I don't know what you think, but I'm never convinced that people do things purely for the money in itself. It's more the money is a score. So it's like a game where the score is the size of your bonus or the size of your salary or the size or the amount of money you've made for your bank or your bank has made. So money is important in that kind of way. I don't think people so much just, especially commit crimes in that kind of environment because they want to buy a Rolls Royce or a Ferrari or something.
No, I think they often get. It's like it's similar. It's like you say, as a score, it's like a competition with their colleagues, and it's definitely that competitive instinct. I mean, I didn't work in a sort of revenue generating role, so I wasn't trading or in the merger side at all. But I found the whole, and I think this is different maybe with the rise of the American investment banks, where they start buying up all the smaller operations. I just found the whole corporate atmosphere very suffocating, and I just finally couldn't take it after a very long time. But I get the sense that's not what you experienced so much, or maybe it is. I don't know.
Well, I was fortunate. I mean, the bank was called Saudi International Bank, and it was partly owned by the Saudi government and partly by Morgan Guarantee, which is the bank that became JP Morgan that you worked for. But it was a small bank of about 200 people, and it had a very good culture. So we all helped each other. They were nice people. They came from all over the world. I trusted the people I worked with. Everyone was basically honest. But outside, there were all these kind of, in particular at that stage, American investment banks. Solomon Brothers was one, Drexel. And these were dangerous guys, but they were sort of exciting to deal with. So the danger was out there down the telephone wires, and they were the kind of people I wanted to write about. So I wrote about that kind of investment banking culture, which I never worked for. And I was given a couple of job offers, but I decided I didn't want to work there, however much money they paid me, and I haven't regretted that since.
Well, there's one of your novels, and I forget the title, but does it involve a kind of sexual harassment accusation? Yes. And that struck me because just when I was
that's on the edge.
On the edge, right?
That's on the edge.
And I'll put links to all these in the show notes for our listeners. But that. The way banks handle that now, the absolute panic is for the bank to get out into the press that this is happening, and they'll do anything to avoid that fate of it being in the newspaper. Regardless of whether it's the right thing to do or not, it's just we don't want it to get out.
Yeah.
Is that something that was the case when you were where you were? Or?
Well, it was interesting, and that was, I think, my 7th book. So I'd been out of the city for 10 years probably, and it had changed a bit. I mean, it was different then than it is now. I did a fair bit of research as usual, and there were some places then which were definitely, certain banks that were definitely misogynistic in a way that quite shocked me. I went into one dealing room where there wasn't a single woman there, which was odd. And, 10 years before there would have been, and that they said they just didn't hire them because of the problems of what you were saying, which really shocked me. I mean, this is 2005, there was a big London bank which didn't employ women traders because they were worried about people groping them. I mean, it was appalling. And so then part of it was, it was in flux. So there's bad stuff going on. People were trying to push it under the carpet, which was having counterproductive effects. And then there were also, I mean, I remember talking to a sexual harassment lawyer and saying, well, this is all terrible. Are all these cases that women bring up as bad as this? And she said, oh no, there's a large proportion of them that are just made up. So there was the case of women making up sexual harassment cases. The whole thing is just a complete mess. And once again, the little bank I work for, as far as I'm aware, none of that went on. It probably did, and it was probably wrong, but it kind of got out of it, got sort of weaponized and out of proportion in all sorts of ways. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that there are some people whose lives were ruined by it, and that's what I wanted to write about.
Interesting stuff. And then the financial crash which occurred, I mean, it was hugely influential, in virtually every country in the world in 2008. How influential was it on your novel writing?
Well, by that stage, I decided to give up on financial thrillers. So then the question was, should I go back to them? And one of the reasons I gave up on financial thrillers was I had the good guys and the bad guys and the shades of grey. They'd taken over these huge banks. The culture was corrupt, in my mind. They were doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And when the crash happened, that didn't surprise me. That seemed to be like the inevitable result of this sort of corrupted culture. And I didn't really want to write about that because I didn't like it. And also, it didn't seem to be getting cleared out. However, Iceland was particularly badly damaged, and they had a little revolution called the Pots and Pans Revolution, where a few thousand people every Saturday afternoon would go into the square in the middle of Reykjavik and bang pots and pans and demand that the government step down. And the government did step down, so it was sort of successful. They overthrew the government in a very peaceful way. I thought, well, it'd be quite interesting to write about the victims of that. So in one of my books, 66 Degrees North, I write about a small group of Icelanders who want to be a bit more aggressive in their revolution and find the people who they held responsible for the crash and kill them. One of whom was the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was particularly tough on Iceland for, I suppose, understandable reasons. But my Icelandic bad guys didn't think that. So it's more about ordinary people revolting rather than the bankers themselves.
Iceland hugely impacted by the crash. That sounds fantastic. I'll put a link in for that one as well. Now, I think we're getting to the end, but there's one nice story. We've talked about the misery of the financial world. The story I read, which is a true story. Can you tell me about John Gnarr? I probably pronounced that incorrectly. The mayor of Iceland, who how did he become mayor? And this probably going back to your point about Icelandic people being a little bit odd.
Yes. So it's Jón Gnarr is his name.
Jón Gnarr.
There's something called The Night Shift, which I think you can still get on British television, which was a sort of office kind of thing set in a petrol station in Iceland. Anyhow, there's an election after the crash for mayor of Reykjavik. And he stood on a platform he wanted to get a polar bear in the Reykjavik Zoo. He wanted to build a massive prison for white-collar criminals all over the world, so Iceland could make money by locking up white-collar criminals. And his reason for doing the job was he wanted a chauffeur-driven car so he could drive it, but have a chauffeur to chat to on his way to work. And he's the top comedian in Iceland, and he got elected. So he became mayor of Reykjavik, and he did a reasonable job, actually. But I mean, Iceland it's a classic political thing. Half people think it was rubbish, half people think it was pretty good. But he did a pretty good job, because what happened was a lot of sort of quite capable administrators popped up and said, "Sure, I'll help you run Reykjavik," and so he did well. He's no longer mayor of Reykjavik, but it was a good effort.
I think that's a nice story. Final question then, Michael. What are you working on next?
Well, the book I've just finished, and which is coming in a few months, is called Death in Dalvik. and it's an Iceland book, and it's actually about Bitcoin trading. It's about a 16-year-old girl who is given 5 Bitcoins by her father, and she manages to trade this into several $100,000, which she uses to bail out her grandparents' farm, which is going bankrupt. And this is a farm in the small fishing village of Dalvik. Then her mother is so impressed by this that she gets involved in cryptocurrency and gets involved in a dodgy cryptocurrency, which she sells to all the rich people in Dalvik, and they all go bust together. And as a result, she's found murdered on a mountainside. So my man Magnus has to investigate. So it's partly, it's financial, I suppose, in a way, although I try and explain it as clearly as I can. I think Bitcoin is interesting. And I think it's interesting to view it from the perspective of a sort of 16-year-old schoolgirl who then becomes a student, rather than, from the point of view of a banker or some sort of financier. So it was a lot of fun to write.
Brilliant stuff. Bitcoin. I guess that's for another podcast. I've thrown a couple of $100 at Bitcoin. I started in December, and I've losses of 30% so far. So
well, there you go.
I know, but it's a long-term thing. I'm just doing it for fun, I suppose.
Yeah.
Great. You don't indulge in Bitcoin, do you, or any cryptocurrency?
Well, normally it's the kind of research I do. I would have bought a few £100 worth, but it's so. I was worried about computer viruses. I was worried about tax. I was worried about, all the kind of ramifications of trading Bitcoin. So I just thought I won't be bothered. I'll just find out how other people do it.
Oh, right.
So no, I haven't invested myself.
Oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Oh, right. Okay. Right, Michael. Well, that's fantastic. It's been great talking to you. Good stuff. And,
yes, you too.
Yeah, and thank you, and best of luck with the new book.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
I do hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. Always nice talking to Michael about all the different periods of history that he knows about, and also good for any budding novelists out there. Speaking of which, I know I've banged on about this, but there's the unpublished novel competition. Tell your friends, anyone you know who's written a book, anyone who's written some historical fiction that's not published or self-published can enter into our competition with a fantastic prize of £500, and the novel gets published. So next week, I'm going to have Keith Lowe on. Keith's a historian of World War II and its aftermath. He wrote a very good book called Savage Continent, all about how Europe, the state of Europe in the immediate aftermath of World War II. He's also written a good book on the World War II monuments and statues called Prisoners of History, and also a fantastic book on the bombing of Hamburg. So I'm going to get him on, talk to him for a while about all that kind of stuff. As ever, you can get hold of me. I'm on the Twitter at OllieWCQ, OLLIEWCQ. And I do hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you and good night.